Ruvia woke up because she started coughing very loudly. The girl didn't understand what was happening and why she was now on the floor. It seemed like this was her 54th life. She climbed onto the bed and sighed. She is very tired of everything. She will live this life like a lazy person. Ruvia decided that she would just rest all the time and do nothing. But suddenly, a woman burst into her room, outraged that the girl had only just woken up. The woman said that Ruvia was as useless as her mother and weak to boot. The girl hasn't even had time to recharge yet, and she's already listening to lectures. The stepmother started screaming that she should come to her senses and finally get up and not blink her eyes. The lady believed that the girl had problems with her head due to the fever. But the girl told her to shut up, and the woman was completely horrified. This is Ruvia de Grandia Laruxin. She is 18 years old and died of a fever. She was the princess of the Duchy of Ruxin. Princess is not the best status for a lazy life. Moreover, in everyday life, she was ignored by the servants. The heartless stepmother and ruthless brother were also present. Selfish younger sister and indifferent father. She has a simply amazing family. The woman continued to scream and ask why she was treating her like this. The main character thought that it would be difficult, but she could handle it. The stepmother continued to shout and ask what kind of tone Ruvia was using. She couldn't accept the fact that the girl was bragging about her bad blood in this way. Perhaps she should punish the girl properly so that she would come to her senses. The main character remembered that it was most likely the Archduke's wife, Margaret, who was also the girl's stepmother. So the girl asked for forgiveness and said that she had just woken up and therefore had not yet come to her senses. If the mistress has finished, the girl will ask her to leave, but if she had anything left to say, Ruvia would still tell her to leave. It's all because the girl is very tired and won't be receiving guests now. The stepmother was simply furious. She did not understand how this girl could continue to be so insolent to her. But Ruvia looked at the woman in such a way that she even became frightened. For such a pampered aristocrat, her words would be an excessive pressure. It would be desirable for her to get scared and simply leave. The woman turned around and told her to get ready, because she would definitely punish her for such antics. After that, she turned around and began to leave, slamming the door behind her. Perhaps the main character went a bit overboard. But no worries, everything will resolve itself. Then the main character decided to go to the mirror and look at her appearance. Shiny silver hair and eyes like precious stones. She is very beautiful, as befits a princess. But being too attractive is also tiring. A princess title, a ruined family, a pretty face. None of this suggests a lazy life. A more comfortable option would be to be rejected by a noble man. She's been through this before, so she knows what it's like. After this, Ruvia sighed and lay down on the sofa. She hadn't chatted so freely for a long time. After that, she was startled by the fact that someone had broken into her place again. It was some guy who was asking if everything his mother said was true. She thought he was some kind of bore. He didn't even look very good. This is Marquis Sven. He is her brother from another mother, the eldest son of the Grand Archduke Rusen. This stepmother simply brought reinforcements and is standing behind, blazing with anger. It seems the girl started hallucinating due to fatigue, and she saw this guy with a dog in his arms. The man demanded that she answer, because his mother had told him about her outrageous behavior. The main character sighed. She really wanted to rest already. They are all very annoying, and there is no end to it. She needs to end this conversation, and as quickly as possible. Therefore, the girl replied that everything was correct, and she had behaved rudely towards a person who calls herself a mother. Ruvia also noticed that the first thing this woman did was reproach and taunt her daughter for almost dying from a fever. The brother began to say that she was simply going too far and that perhaps her mother's words had upset her, but there was no malicious intent in them. Ruvia, with a serious face, noted that she wanted to ask something. She asked again whether his lectures were really out of love for his younger sister or whether he wanted her to show respect to family members no matter what. Her brother was simply horrified. He didn't know what to answer. He was completely speechless from such a question. He would either realize he was being unfair to his sick sister or acknowledge the fact that his biological mother had been overly harsh. The boy noted that either way, she was wrong and should apologize to his mother. The girl said apple because she wanted to make a play on words. Apology and apple are the same word in Korean. The woman was simply horrified and asked again what it meant. The girl replied that she would give her an apple, so there was no need to sulk. Since she liked them so much, she could go and eat as many as she wanted. After this, there was silence. The brother asked Ruvia again what was wrong with her behavior. For the sister replied that she did not think that she was wrong in anything. Apples are very healthy. Eating one a day is enough to avoid getting seriously ill. Ruvia also remarked that she knew what she was talking about. Apples were very healthy. Her brother was simply furious. He bit his teeth and told his mother that they thought it was time. The woman was outraged. She did not understand why he was not doing anything. The guy tried to take her, and the woman said that since he was sure of it, she would listen to him. They slammed the door behind them. In principle, the guy wasn't that stupid, since he realized that he had to leave when there was no chance of winning. After this, Ruvia decided to lie down on the bed again. Now she could sleep peacefully. When she slept, she had a dream that she had not seen for a long time. She even cried because of it. She asked the maid to bring her something, but then she realized, 53rd farewell. I still can't get used to parting with those she loved. She needs something to eat. Food is the best medicine for sadness. When she went out, she heard the maids gossiping. She asked for food, medium rare meat. If there is wine, then you also need to bring it, and it is preferable that it be from the Dorpt Winery Livian variety. The maids looked at her askance. Ruvia asked again why they were standing there and ordered that they be brought immediately. The maid informed the lady that the time for serving dishes was over. There was no more food, and the other women began to laugh. Ruvia told them to get ready in that case because she could wait. The maid was in complete confusion and already asked herself again what she had just heard. The lady repeated that she had told her to cook, since there was no food. The maid sighed and remarked that she was nothing but trouble. She turned around and said that she would serve food immediately. As Ruvia sat at the table, she saw the other maids whispering among themselves. This problem cannot be solved quickly. This girl was constantly bullied. Well, she decided to forget about it because she needed to eat first, but suddenly a bowl of food landed on her table. Everything spilled everywhere and splashed the lady. The maid replied that this was the only thing left, and that I wish you bon appetit. The lady asked again if she really had nothing more to say. The maid remarked that next time she should try to arrive on time. They can't constantly adjust to her. Ruvia got up from the table and hit the woman so hard that she flew back. The lady ordered her to stand up. It seemed the difference in status between them was not enough for her. Ruvia is the Archduke's first daughter. Disrespect for her is tantamount to disrespect for the Grand Archduke Rusen. So the lady asked again if she really had several lives left since she was behaving like this. The maid began to justify herself and say that she would never dare to show disrespect to her. She was even trembling. The mistress noted that it was interesting to see what the other maids thought about this. The women immediately fell to their knees and noted that they too had been at fault, and therefore asked her to have mercy on them. They begged for mercy and said that they would definitely prepare everything. The lady said that she agreed with them and gave them another chance. The women were very grateful to her, bowed and ran to the kitchen. They prepared a very good dinner for her. The girl was delighted, even though she scolded the head maid in front of everyone. In any case, people here ignore and treat Ruvia with hostility. There are many ways to change the situation, such as gaining courage through good deeds and showing cruelty and destroying enemies. But the main problem is that all this requires effort. Even if she overcomes her laziness and sways people to her side, she will still be given away in a marriage of convenience as soon as she comes of age. Princess Ruvia already has a fiancé. He is the fourth prince of the Western Empire, a remarkable figure who has amassed enough power to threaten the crown prince, despite having no right to the succession. He is the most outstanding suitor for us in the entire western part of the continent. Her life will go down the drain if she marries the fourth prince. Be that as it may, this union cannot be allowed, so she decided to act. A knight approached her from behind. He greeted the lady and said that the great Archduke was calling her to him. The girl was surprised, and now asked if the Archduke was really calling her right now. The knight confirmed this, and the girl considered it an excellent opportunity. She asked the knight to escort her. As the Western proverb goes, cut the knot that twists itself. She would immediately sever ties with this family. The lady came and bowed. She introduced herself and greeted the great Archduke. Now she knew what kind of ruler the Grand Duchy of Ruxen was. Just by looking at him, you can tell that as a leader, he is impeccable. The man noted that she was not being friendly today, and the lady noted that she was not guilty of anything. Therefore, there was no reason to worry. After thinking for a while, the father noticed that she had changed, as if she were a completely different person. Basically, that's true. Well, the girl decided to tell him that it was just part of growing up. She was getting a little taller every morning, and it seemed like her personality was changing just as rapidly. The father was surprised and noted that they had not seen each other for a long time. The girl didn't understand what kind of reaction this was. Apparently, she thought that he wouldn't like it. Ruvia's birth mother was not from a noble family, but the great Archduke's love was so great that he wanted to take her as his wife. However, the daughter of his beloved woman will be carried away by a fever caused by all sorts of neglect from society and humiliation from her stepmother. It is unclear why this man did nothing. The father asked her if she knew why he had called her, and the girl replied that she had a rough idea. My father is going to scold me, but he will not tolerate unnecessary noise in his house. So he asks her to try to make sure this doesn't happen again. He'll talk to her mother later. The girl believed that he was simply asking her to cover the rotting wound with a rag and not pay attention. Father didn't understand what she was saying, and that made him a little angry. Ruvia told him that there were two options to heal the wound. The first is to take medication little by little and wait until it heals, and the second is to simply squeeze out the pus and thereby get rid of it. But since it is already too late, we must use the second option. She's leaving the Ruxin Duchy today. The servant was completely shocked and asked what the lady was talking about. Her father asked her again if she really thought he would listen to this nonsense, but the girl noted that he would have to listen to it. It's all because he is the cause of this wound. Ruvia knows she's an eyesore in this house. If it stays, it will never heal sooner, and they will continue to hurt each other, so for the good of everyone, she will leave. And when her father did not answer, she remarked that she would assume that he agreed and that she would leave the duchy within the day. After which the girl thanked her father and told him to take care of himself. She turned around and started to leave, slamming the door behind her so that her father didn't have time to say anything. He didn't even try to hold her back, although it only played into her hands. Ruvia is actually such an unfortunate child. She will live this life happily for her sake. She began to collect her things, took her clothes, and also took a blanket instead of a sleeping bag. She doesn't have any jewelry, but she can earn money. In principle, this should be enough. Then someone approached her and asked what she was doing now. They say the princess left the mansion, so the servant thought it was worth stopping her. The Archduke turned to the knight and told him to watch the princess until she returned. It won't take too much time. The knight turned to the duke and asked what would happen if the princess really decided to leave the duchy forever. The man replied that then he would have to bring her back here by force. The man, of course, listened to his master and quickly left. The servant turned to the master and asked what he intended to do if the princess was brought against her will. He understands the master's feelings perfectly. The princess is not guilty of anything. The Archduke replied that he knew and understood this perfectly well. The princess acted a little differently. She was always so depressed. But today, she looked more determined than anyone else. It seemed to him that she would forever fly away to where they could not reach. Earlier, her brother approached her and asked what she was doing there. The girl replied that she was going to leave the mansion. Her brother didn't understand what she was talking about and thought it was just some kind of stupid joke. Ruvia asked for forgiveness, but she thinks this is the only right path for her. But the brother did not understand why she decided this, which is why the girl asked if there really were better options. If they had been, the situation wouldn't have gone so far. Her brother didn't know what to say to that. Therefore, the girl said that in that case, she would already be leaving and also wished him good health. Her brother grabbed her hand and asked her to wait and take something from him. This is an amulet bearing the seal of the Grand Archduke Ruxin. If she has any pleasure, she must use it. It is an artifact with a lot of magic. He offered her to use it in case of emergency. She should have tried while Ruvia was alive, but now it's too late. She's ready to say goodbye to this house. But suddenly, she heard someone calling her very loudly. It was Marie, the mistress's maid, who with tears in her eyes said that she would go with her mistress. The girl did not understand how she could leave her because she would not be able to live without her mistress. In her haste, the main character completely forgot that this child was the only one who was on Ruvia's side. The lady asked Marie to come back. It would be very difficult for her with the lady, but the girl said that there was nothing to worry about and that she would be useful to the mistress, so she begged to be taken along. Ruvia didn't understand why she was being so stubborn. Nothing good would happen to her with her. But the girl said that she wanted to go with the lady because she liked her. She remembered the guy's words about how he was going after her because he liked her, and it was obvious. The lady nevertheless agreed, because if the girl wanted it that way, she would take her with her. Marie was very grateful to her and promised that she would be a smart girl. The lady asked if Marie had any money by any chance. The girl replied that she had a little, but she spent it on a cake. And she also said that she would definitely earn more money. The lady was surprised. The girl began to say that she was very capable and that it would not be difficult for her to get money. She was so cute that Ruvia even smiled. She asked again if Marie really liked cakes that much. The girl replied that of course she really loved strawberries. The lady asked what else she liked to eat. The girl said that she likes filet mignon and also veal tenderloin steak. In fact, she had never tried them, but she had seen the owners eating them and was very envious. Then Ruvia smiled and said that for dinner tonight, they would have filet mignon and strawberry shortcake. The girl got scared and asked again what they would do because they had no money. The lady noted that money could be earned and asked the girl to follow her. The maid asked again what her mistress wanted to do and hoped that she was not going to do anything bad. Marie asked if the lady had any business in this establishment. The man asked what they had come for. Ruvia asked if she could borrow the instrument for a while. The man was surprised when he looked at the harp and noted that their establishment did not rent it out. The lady said she would give him 5 cents for 2 hours. He was very surprised, and Maria noted that the harp itself cost 10 centials, while Our Lady relied only on the power of the aristocracy. The man agreed and said he owed her the harp. When they left, Mary asked what her mistress intended to do with it. Ruvia noted that this was how she was going to make money and noted that this place would suit them. She asked Marie to hold her hat. The girl was surprised and asked the lady what she was going to do. Ruvia asked her to turn it over so that she could put the money in it. The girl could not believe that her mistress was actually going to play the harp now. People immediately heard this sound and began to think that it was some kind of street concert. Everyone came to their senses. The maid was very worried. Everyone was shocked. They didn't know that there was such a skilled musician on this street. It was so nice to be able to play the harp again. In her past life, she couldn't even touch an instrument. A whole crowd gathered. They threw in a lot of coins. Marie thanked everyone. She was simply delighted. The crowd could not understand who could play the harp less well. Suddenly, the woman suggested that the girl give a concert in her house. Everyone started arguing. They lined up to see whose house they would host the concert at. One of the men suggested that she become a permanent musician in their home, and the noise and hubbub began. The lady told Maria that it was time for them to go. When Marie started counting the money, she realized that it came to about 300 cien. It seems that this is the monthly salary of ordinary citizens. The maid thought that the mistress had never held a musical instrument in her hands, so she was interested in how the mistress managed to play such a beautiful melody. The girl replied that she was simply a genius, and the maid was simply delighted. Maria noted that she had thought so, which is why the lady always looked as if she lived in her own world. It was good that this girl trusted her. The lady was pleased with it. She asked the maid to keep track of this money. Now she will be responsible for all her savings. Ruvia is after all the princess of the Ruxan Duchy and cannot control the finances on her own, so Marie will be handling this. The girl was absolutely delighted. She promised that she would try, so you can trust her point. Now the mistress suggested going out to eat, and the maid of course did not refuse. Marie became very embarrassed and remarked that I also had to go to such a place for her sake. Ruvia replied that it was not because of her and that the lady herself wanted it that way. She also likes veal tenderloin steak and strawberry shortcake, so she shouldn't jump to conclusions. The girl was simply delighted and told her that she would definitely try even harder. Ruvia asked me if she found it strange that her behavior had changed so much. The girl replied that it was certainly surprising, but everything was fine because she was her mistress. She was her favorite mistress. And she likes how resilient she is now even more. But this does not mean that her character was bad before. It was just that before her heart would break into pieces just from looking at her mistress. But she likes everything both the way she was before and the way she is now. The lady smiled, and the girl asked what the gentleman was planning to do next. She thought that she would become a bard. Ruvia replied that this was not so. They would go to the line, the free city of Lynette, a land of the Western Empire that belongs to no one. 200 years ago, it was an ordinary village. And now it is the most significant city on the continent, all thanks to the prestigious academy. Lynette Academy is a higher education institution with a wide range of specializations. Teenagers up to 20 years old study there. It's a place with deep memories for the girl. Ruvi simply founded this academy in one of her past lives. The lady decided to rent a room and inquired about rooms on the top floor. It cost 50 centimes. The girl replied that of course there was, and asked which room she preferred. and whether they would like to stay alone. The woman said she'd like a better room for two. Marie asked if they'd be staying there tonight. The lady replied that it was true, since they needed to board the ship to get to Lynette, and since they needed to catch the first flight, they couldn't spend the night here. The girl tried to explain to the lady that it was very expensive here, and she also had to buy a ticket. The lady noted that there was no need to worry, she had everything under control. While the mistress was taking a bath, Mary asked why she wanted to go to the bathroom. She assumed the girl was planning to enroll in the academy. The lady replied that this was true, and that freshmen were being recruited right now, so she wanted to take the entrance exam. Marie noted that chasing your dream is very inspiring, and her mistress is very cool. Basically, this is the first step to living as a sloth. If you are accepted, food and accommodation are provided free of charge, as the education here is skills-oriented. If you do well on the tests, there won't be any attendance issues, so that's a golden prize. Marie asked if the lady had decided what program she wanted to apply to. She noted that a special female engineer would be suitable for the lady, but the lady noted that she had not yet thought about this and needed to decide. Ruvia is going on vacation. She doesn't even think about studying how many years of free food and idleness have I had. Look, she was smiling, but the lady decided to ask what was making her laugh so much. The girl noted that she was simply in a good mood. Today, she tried filet mignon for the first time, and tomorrow she would board a boat for the first time. The girl was so happy to be going to the links with her mistress, and she was incredibly happy just to be doing it next to her mistress. The lady remarked that once they got there, she would buy her a mountain of strawberry cakes. The next morning, Marie reported that she had already packed everything. The lady noted that it was necessary to buy something for the journey. After all, it would take 3 days to sail, and it was necessary to prepare in advance. And also she opened the door and immediately saw Sir Urbo. She noted that she could see him, and there was no need to hide. She told him not to pretend he had been following them since yesterday. The gentleman greeted the lady, and she asked what he needed. She replied that the Duke had instructed him to ensure her safety, so he asked for understanding because he was forced to follow her. The lady noted that she had no intention of sending him back. The man did not understand what she wanted from him then. Ruvia noticed that he works hard, so she invites him in for tea. Meanwhile, Marie whispered to the lady what they would do if he caught them. Even if you speak quietly, the owner of Montessor will hear absolutely every word. Therefore, the lady did not answer anything and told him to drink this tea and accept it from her and Marie as a sign of gratitude for his care. The gentleman was very grateful to her and began to drink tea. After this, he turned to the lady and told her to return to the duchy. The lady replied that it was not interesting, and the knight did not understand why this was so, and whether she was really going to leave these lands. The lady noted because it was indeed, so they were sailing away on today's ship. The knight declared that he could not allow this. The Duke ordered him to return her home, even against her will, but only if she leaves his domain, or doesn't return for a long time. This was actually unexpected. The girl hadn't expected it. She noted that she understood perfectly well that he had an order and a knight, and he was delighted to think that this meant that they were going to the duchy. The lady noted that he should also understand her situation, just as she understands his situation. The knight was in complete shock. He didn't understand what the lady was talking about. Everything went dark before his eyes, and he fell headfirst onto the table. Marie was very scared and immediately rushed to him and called for her mistress in panic. The lady told her to leave him like that. He fell asleep. Maria did not understand what this meant, but the lady noted that if she listened closely, she would even hear that he was snoring. It worked like clockwork. Her sleeping pills were good. The girl asked the lady why he fell asleep so suddenly. Ruvia noticed that he was probably tired, and she suggested moving him to the bed so that he could get a good night's sleep. And they said that Sir was the most outstanding of all the wielders of mana. He's a sucker for tea from the person he's spying on. He's so naive. The lady closed the door, left a note for the night that the payment for the stay was due, and she was leaving it to him and hoped that this would not happen again. This is a punishment for his actions, not because she didn't want to pay. Marie was absolutely delighted by what she saw and hastened to inform her mistress that this was Port Lynette. Her eyes sparkled and her voice trembled with admiration. Meanwhile, the lady felt extremely tired. She could barely suppress a yawn, as long days on the road had worn her out. The 3 days spent on the ship had left their mark. The lady's entire body seemed to have become numb. Every muscle ached from the tension. Marie, not hiding her delight, shouted loudly for her mistress to look at the enormous port. For her, the sight was truly wondrous. However, the lady reacted calmly. She merely dryly noted that the port was certainly beautiful, but that it didn't move her. The girl was surprised that her mistress remained indifferent. Ruvia, noticing her surprise, said with a slight smile that she was of course surprised. Marie chuckled and noticed that the lady was lying. In fact, she simply didn't understand what everyone was so excited about. The lady was accustomed to such sights. This wasn't her first visit to such a large city, and she even lived here once. She was a teacher then and walked these streets holding the hand of a boy who excitedly asked if they would live here. The lady then confidently replied that this city would become their new home, and her words were full of warmth and promise. The children were delighted with her words, especially when they learned that the lady was going to build a school for them here. The boy asked curiously what the lady would name the school. She suggested the children think of a name themselves and choose one together. The children perked up and began vying with each other to offer their ideas, happily raising their hands to be heard. The blue-haired boy suggested naming the school Lynette, and the idea immediately caused a storm of emotions among the others. Everyone was delighted with the proposal, but the lady gently advised them to look for another name to find something special. However, the children insisted that the name could not be changed. They wanted to name the school after their mistress to perpetuate her name. Back then, it was just a small school for 5 orphans. The lady couldn't have imagined that it would become the best on the entire continent. Even if she had to spend 1,000 years at Lynette Academy, she would be happy because the school became her pride. Almost 200 years have passed, and very few memories remain from that time, only shadows of the past. But these warm memories still gave the lady strength and encouraged her a little in the present. Ruvia was soon informed that her registration was complete, and the exam was scheduled for the following week. Marie confidently told the lady not to worry. She believed in her and knew that everything would definitely work out. Even if the lady fails her exams, she won't be upset. It won't be a problem for her. She'll find something else to do. Earning money is easy for her. Ruvia thought it was important not to forget how smart and capable her mistress was. She always rose to the occasion. Talented students from all over the West flocked to the exams. Everyone wanted to get in, and the competition was fierce. As the level of knowledge had changed over the past 200 years. The demands were now much higher. The lady really didn't want to study, but she had to. Without preparation, she risked failing the exams. She told Maria to go to the dorm first. She decided to go to the library herself. She needed to study. The maid said that she would take the bags, since the mistress wanted to stay in the library to study. Maria happily said goodbye and ran to the dormitory, leaving the lady alone with the books. Ruvia chose a book about the humanities, history, and philosophy. She decided to read it to gain some insight into the topic. The book's title seemed tiresome. She didn't understand why it was so interesting, but it was a pleasure to read. She wondered why she enjoyed reading so much. She realized it had been a long time since she'd read just for pleasure. Her previous life had been harsh, full of battles, conspiracies, and death. There was no room for peace. Back then, she only dreamed of one day being able to calmly read books without thinking about battles and dangers. It seems her wish came true. Reading proved far more interesting than boring official documents. After reading, the lady decided to rest a little and went out into the garden to unwind in the fresh air. She was sitting quietly in the garden, not bothering anyone, when suddenly someone addressed her, breaking the silence. Opening her eyes, she saw a girl with pink hair standing in front of her looking at her. The girl was surprised and said that at first she thought she had made a mistake, but it really was Mrs. Ruvia. She noted that they hadn't seen each other for a long time, and a friendly, warm smile appeared on her face. It was Marquis Hansen's daughter, and her name was Janet. She greeted the lady and remarked that it was very surprising, as she hadn't expected to see her there. She was, after all, the famous Princess Ruvia of the Ruxan Duchy. She wondered why the girl at the academy had assumed she'd come to take the exams. Janet admired her bravery. She believed that it would anger the Grand Duke. It is a great honor for any family if one of its members passes the exam at the academy, but it can also bring shame on the name of their house if they fail. The dim-witted Princess Ruxina, a disgrace to the duchy, and a mockery of high society. Why is she even trying to take the entrance exam to Lynette? She'll fail it anyway. She's got plenty of courage, that's what she's trying to say. Marquis Hansen's daughter, Jeanette. Her father is one of the empire's mainstays, a great aristocrat, one might say. It's not far behind the Ruxan Duchy in importance, but she can handle it no matter what. The lady noted that before the most common thing she saw was blood, but here was a girl who looked like cotton candy. which was quite cute. The girl didn't quite understand what Lady Ruvia's smile meant. Meanwhile, the mistress came to have a little fun and said that, judging by her words, she wasn't at all afraid of failing. The girl noted that it was all because of this, that she had prepared with all her might. The lady asked if she could ask a couple of questions, as she had recently read a book and was confused. The girl replied that the lady could ask her as many questions as she wanted. Ruvia asked if she could answer how Kassan's problems affected future generations in the war to liberate the Southern Empire in 524 CE. Janet replied that it was a very standard question. She began to talk about the victory of the Southern Empire over the Northern one, describing how this affected the political balance, but the lady abruptly interrupted her, saying that she did not want to hear about the consequences of the war. She then cautiously asked about Kassan's role in the emancipation movement, noting that the movement had changed not only Southern society, but also had an impact on the Eastern lands. The girl was frightened and hastened to justify herself, saying that she had meant something completely different and that her words had been misunderstood. To change the subject, she asked about Fresnel's theorem concerning the refraction of light and asked how to correctly establish the beta factor in the 38th equation for a given differential. The girl tried to answer something, but quickly realized that she would not be able to explain such a complex topic and fell silent. The lady, seeing her confusion, decided to ask an even more difficult question about the paradoxical reaction of the empathic nerve and the physiological reactions of the body. She noticed how the girl began to twitch nervously and wondered why such a reaction arose to such a simple question in her opinion. The lady realized that this topic was probably not the best one for teasing the girl, and perhaps it would be worth changing the approach. She decided to ask the girl if she had prepared well for the classes, hoping to hear a more confident answer. The girl blushed deeply, but still said that she had prepared diligently and tried her best. The lady smiled and said that she was grateful for her efforts, and that perhaps she should read a little more herself. You shouldn't think that the lady said this mockingly. She was genuinely worried about her and wanted to help. The girl turned away, and the lady could not understand what exactly caused her to behave like this. The girl began to walk away sadly, and the lady wondered if she should have pressed her harder, because if she continued to bully her, it would become tiresome. Although deep down, the lady did not believe that Janet could defeat her in anything. Besides, she felt a little sorry for this sweet girl who seemed to have no idea about some things. Feeling hungry, the lady decided to treat herself to something tasty in honor of the fact that the girl had studied well after all. A week later, her maid Maria was confident that her mistress would pass the upcoming exam without difficulty. But even if she doesn't cope, it's not scary. There's no need to worry too much about it and put too much pressure on yourself. The man announced the exam was beginning. The lady immediately prepared herself, pen at the ready. She was calm and ready to tackle the tasks. When she saw the questions, she thought they were too easy. She was at a loss, unsure of how to proceed, even though her team had worked so hard. She also realized she'd forgotten to check the score required to pass. Answering perfectly might raise suspicion. Behind her sat Janet, confidently filling out the answers. The lady noticed her concentration and calm. From the way Janet worked confidently, it became clear that the tasks were really not difficult, and perhaps there was no catch. The lady decided she would score exactly 90 points. This would be enough to pass the exam and not stand out. She thought it was a great plan. From now on, her life would be simpler. She could afford to be a little lazy. In the morning, while the lady was sleeping, someone was thinking about how she had done on the exam and whether she was confident in her answers. Despite the high level of competition, no one doubted her abilities. She was seen as a strong contender. The lady told everyone she was confident everything would be fine. She refused to entertain the thought of failure. She considered herself a genius. She was sure that passing the exam was just a formality for her. She gave just enough correct answers to earn a score of 90. That's definitely enough to pass. The maid asked if she'd heard right and added that everyone was talking about how difficult the exam was. Hearing this, she became even more nervous. The lady stood up abruptly and asked in surprise whether the exam was really as difficult as everyone said, as if she didn't believe what she heard. After all, on the way, she overheard you saying that, in the last 10 years, the exam had not been as difficult as it was this time. There are rumors that some people think it's pointless to wait for the results and simply leave without even hoping for a positive outcome. The lady could not believe her ears and wondered if she had gone too far when she expected to get at least 90 points. Although if you think about it, There are real talents gathered here from all over the continent, so there is probably no need to worry in advance. She tried to calm herself down, hoping she was right, but she still crawled into the blanket and sat wrapped up to hide her anxiety. The maid noticed that many seemed to have failed, and she couldn't understand how this had happened. The mistress admitted that she was a little worried herself. When she stated her name, the man was completely shocked to hear that the person standing in front of him was the princess of the Ruxin Duchy. The lady confirmed that it was indeed her, and then the man said that they had been waiting for her for a long time, asking them to open the letter quickly. As soon as she opened the envelope, she was overcome with a bad feeling, and after reading the letter, she realized that she was in serious trouble. Ruvia couldn't understand why she had the best score. She hoped there was a mistake because she didn't think 90 points could be the highest. However, I understood perfectly well how such a result could be the best of all. Janet approached Ruvia, noting with a slight smile that they were meeting again. There was a confidence in her voice, as if she had been expecting this meeting for a long time. Janet asked curiously how the lady had done on the exam. There was a hint of mockery in her tone, as if she already knew the answer. Although according to her, there was no point in even answering. Janet understood everything perfectly well. She added that there was no need to be upset. Passing the entrance exams to Lynette Academy was incredibly difficult. Janet remarked that if Ruvia wanted to retake the exam next year, she could always turn to her for help. Her voice was confident. Janet added that she thought she could be a great support to Ruvia. She was confident in her abilities and knew how to help. At that moment, the woman at the registration desk interrupted their conversation. She remarked that the lady seemed confused, hinting at a misunderstanding of the situation. Ruvia wanted to object to explain that this wasn't true, but Janet snapped that she'd had enough of this kind of talk. Her voice sounded irritated. Janet smiled, noting that the lady was probably trying to hide the obvious result. Bowing her head respectfully, she asked permission to take her leave. Ruvia, feeling awkward, apologized, adding that she was simply too shy. Her voice trembled, betraying her nervousness. The woman with the registration understood everything perfectly. Ruvia hadn't even entered the academy yet, and she was already having problems with those around her. Ruvia was about to leave when the woman with the registration stopped her, saying that she had something that needed her attention. The woman smiled softly, noticing that there was at least one person who genuinely wanted to see her. It warmed her heart, even if everything wasn't going according to plan. Her hopes for an easy 4 years at the academy crumbled to dust. All dreams of a quiet life vanished when reality proved far more complex. A tall, imposing man, unmistakably Baron Cruzane, came out to meet her. His appearance immediately caught her attention, making her wary. Seeing in person the person who had scored the highest scores in the academy's history was truly amazing. Such an event doesn't happen every day. In her past life, Ruvia founded this academy herself and could not have imagined that the exams would become so difficult for future students. Entering the academy will only complicate her life because the attention on the person who scored the highest score will be constant and there will be no time to rest. Then she decided to clarify the situation right away and said that before starting the conversation, she wanted to clarify something in order to avoid misunderstandings. The man didn't seem to understand her words and asked again what exactly she was talking about, clearly not expecting such a start to the conversation. Ruvia replied that it was about her scores. She admitted that on some tasks she had simply gotten lucky and guessed the correct answers. Her high entrance scores didn't reflect her true level of knowledge. They were more a stroke of luck than a sign of her ability. The man laughed, noting that Lady Ruvia was not only intelligent, but also able to display her abilities with modesty and grace. This combination of intelligence and modesty struck him as magnificent. He wanted Ruvia to understand that his admiration stemmed from more than just her success at the ball. Her intelligence and insight had made no less an impression on him. When he glanced at her answer sheet, his surprise was hard to hide. Even in short sentences, she clearly and concisely explained the essence of each question. Some of her answers seemed so precise and profound that they even transcended established academic dogmas and views. He could hardly believe it. In his entire life, he had never encountered such obvious talent. If this wasn't destiny, he no longer knew what it was. He realized that there was very little time left before retirement, but in the end, he would make every effort to reveal her outstanding potential. He was determined and didn't want to put it off any longer, but it was at that moment that Ruvia decided to take her own course. She calmly stated that she was going to cancel her application to the academy, which greatly puzzled him. The man didn't understand what she was saying. He tried to process her words and find some meaning in them, but to no avail. He thought he might have misheard, but Ruvia repeated, she was sorry to have misled him, but she had to go. The man asked her to stop and wait. He didn't understand why she was doing this or what was really going on. Then, Ruvia frankly said that she had a good reason for this decision, although it was difficult for her to talk about it. Ruvia suffered from a chronic illness. She struggled on the exam, and her high score came as a surprise, but studying at the academy would be too much of a challenge for her. The man looked at Ruvia with interest and asked if he could find out what illness was plaguing her. His voice was full of concern, but a hint of curiosity was also evident. The director confidently assured her that he wanted to help. The academy, he said, had the best medical specialists, and perhaps someone could ease her suffering. However, Ruvia calmly replied that she suffered from migraines, a disease that could not be cured even on the advanced Western continent, where medicine had made great strides. She added that if she gets a little tense or worried, she starts to get severe headaches that prevent her from living and studying normally. If it weren't for this constant pain, she would certainly have tried to cope with her studies, but Ruvia felt that in her condition, it would be simply impossible. She assumed the director was already busy and thanked him for his attention. Due to illness, enrollment was impossible, but the academy will forever remain in her heart. However, the man wasn't about to give up. He thought for a moment and then offered her a completely different, unexpected options. The director said Ruvia could stay at the academy. She wouldn't have to attend classes regularly. They'd find a special approach for her. If she commits to studying, the director will personally ensure her passing grades. All classes and homework can be replaced with tests at her convenience. Ruvia thanked him warmly for the offer, but added that she couldn't make any promises now, as she wasn't confident in her abilities. She was about to leave, but the director reminded her of the academy's rule. No expulsion during the academic year is allowed, so that students do not drop out after receiving a scholarship. However, if Ruvia did decide to leave, no one would stop her. She considered it. The terms were truly favorable. It was unlikely they would offer better anywhere else, but the very fact that she had to make promises greatly unsettled her. The laws she was accustomed to didn't apply in this world. One of the local rules stated that if a person made a promise, it automatically became binding, regardless of the circumstances. This was because her soul energy was significantly more powerful than others. As soon as she made a promise, it took on force, and Ruvia was forced to fulfill it with no right to back down. Realizing this, Ruvia firmly stated that she could not accept such conditions. She apologized, not wanting to appear ungrateful, but she couldn't promise anything under the circumstances. The academy director, after listening to her, nodded sympathetically. He said he understood her difficulties and was willing to consider only her doctor's report. Otherwise, unfortunately, they would have no other solution. Ruvia remained silent in response. She felt a little ashamed as the director was being sincere, not motivated by personal gain. He genuinely cared about her and her future. He was a true educator who genuinely cared about the academy's development and tried to retain talented individuals like Ruvia. His words were full of respect and support. Ruvia felt sorry that in this world, people like him and academies like him remained in the shadows. Their work and sincerity often went unnoticed, even though they deserved better. Finally, the director added that the academy's doors would always be open to her. They would await her return when she was well and ready to return to school. Ruvia recalled how the teacher was told that he would definitely continue to develop the academy. He wanted not only to preserve her legacy, but also to widely disseminate the knowledge she left behind. She shuddered, noticing that the second director of the academy had the same zeal. If you looked closely, there was indeed something in common in their looks and gestures. Everything that was happening completely confused her. Ruvia gave up trying to figure it out and simply waved her hand, deciding not to bother her head with unnecessary thoughts. She said she had several conditions. Ruvia gently asked if the director was willing to listen to her and accept them. The director smiled warmly and confidently replied that he would certainly do everything she asked, without hesitating for a minute. Marie was simply delighted when she first saw Ruvia's room, spacious, bright, and elegant. It looked as if it belonged to a noblewoman, not an academy student. Everything here was arranged with exquisite taste, and the place bore no resemblance to a typical dormitory. Marie immediately realized that such comfort was rare, even in wealthy homes. This was truly worth the long journey. Marie thought all the trouble and travel were completely worth it when she saw where her mistress would now live. Now that they had finally arrived, it was time to breathe a sigh of relief. The mistress could rest peacefully in this cozy and luxurious room, enjoying the silence. Marie noticed that the lady had not only entered the academy, but had also passed her exams with top marks. She wondered why Ruvia had asked her to conceal this fact, since it would soon be revealed anyway. However, Ruvia firmly insisted that no one would know about her success. That's why she asked Marie to keep it a secret and not reveal her achievements to anyone. Cruz and Ruvia set two conditions that had to be followed unconditionally, and this surprised the academy administration. The first condition was the right to leave the academy at any time if unforeseen circumstances arose, which seemed unusual for such a talented student. The second condition concerned keeping her exam results confidential. Ruvia insisted that no one but her superiors know about it. The academy's director couldn't understand why such outstanding achievements should be hidden. Her scores were record-breaking and would have been a historic achievement for the school. He believed that such achievements should be known to everyone, but Ruvia explained that excessive attention could provoke a deterioration in her health. The man didn't fully understand what illness was being discussed and initially tried to object. He found it strange that someone would voluntarily give up fame. However, he eventually realized that changing Ruvia's terms was impossible. Her determination was unwavering, and the director was forced to give in. Marie began to sob with resentment. Her mistress deserved universal recognition, and she wanted her talents to be known throughout the continent. But Ruvia hadn't planned on living like ordinary students. Her plans and views on studying were completely different, and she wasn't striving for popularity. Ruvia felt she had to do something to improve the situation. Her thought was that Maria needed a little pampering to make her feel better. The director should have been given some research work, perhaps even his own, so that he could use it as some kind of contribution to the success of the academy, which would give him an additional achievement. When Maria asked why the lady was lying in bed, Ruvia answered calmly that she would rest, and that from now on, she would sleep constantly, feeling how her body needed rest. At this time, the rest of the students are having fun, hanging out, and making new friends before the entrance ceremony, preparing for an important moment in their lives, which creates an atmosphere of anticipation. Some of them have already managed to become very close, and perhaps they are truly lucky, because such relationships help them survive moments of uncertainty and anxiety. But as always for geniuses, solitude is an inevitable part of their journey. They are always alone, absorbed in their own thoughts and reflections. The maid didn't understand what was going on, her gaze puzzled, but even in the future, she wouldn't care. She continued to think that she needed to establish friendly relations with others. Ruvia replied that she would make friends, but only after a while. She needed some time, about 70 hours, before she could do anything new. The maid suggested to the mistress that she start looking for new friends, and perhaps a boyfriend, so as not to dwell on her loneliness, and to find support among people. The mistress was shocked by this proposal. She hadn't expected such advice from her maid, who was always calm and reasonable. She couldn't understand how this could be possible. A boy? The maid explained that the fourth prince was studying at the academy, and this could be her chance. The maid believed that their meeting might not be accidental, that fate might bring them together, and that she might be destined to be with this prince. The maid's imagination already had a vivid picture, her mistress and the fourth prince as a couple together, at some ball or reception ceremony, surrounded by attentive glances. The mistress asked Maria to repeat her words, not believing her ears. She couldn't accept that her maid was speaking of the prince with such confidence. Maria reiterated that the fourth prince not only studied at the academy, but was also the class leader, making him an important figure among the students. The lady was shocked by this news. It was too unexpected, and she couldn't believe that a man like the prince could be in her life. While the maid was pouring tea, she noticed something was wrong with her mistress. Ruvia looked puzzled and thoughtful, as if questions were swirling around in her head. Ruvia was seriously considering this. She looked frowning, as if her thoughts were troubling her. Something didn't add up, and she couldn't get over this idea. She couldn't understand why this prince was studying at Lynette's academy. If he was from the imperial family, it would have been better for him to remain in the palace rather than here. If Ruvia had known that the meeting with the fourth prince would happen so quickly, she would have tried to resolve the matter before leaving the duchy to avoid any possible problems. However, if you think about it, she wouldn't have to leave the dorm, because in 4 years she would have finished her studies and received a diploma without facing any unnecessary hassle. The chances of meeting the prince during this time were slim, as Ruvia had no plans to leave her hiding place and intended to spend all her time in her room, avoiding all meetings. Besides being a runaway princess, her marriage to him would be declared invalid, and this could solve most of her problems, relieving her of unnecessary obligations and pressure. If this did not happen, Ruvia would be forced to resolve the situation on her own, but this no longer seemed such a difficult task to her since she was used to dealing with difficulties. However, she felt very good in bed, and now she was happily enjoying her rest, as if her whole life was reduced to nothing but cozy solitude and comfort. After 12 hours, the maid, who was very worried about her mistress's condition, brought her food, hoping that it would help her regain her strength and return to her normal rhythm of life. After another 24 hours, the maid tried to wake Ruvia, worried that her long absence might affect her well-being and put her in a negative mood. 48 hours had passed, and the maid had already tried all the methods to wake up her mistress, but none of them worked, and Ruvia still did not wake up. Finally, after 72 hours, Ruvia woke up reporting that she had finally had a good night's sleep and was feeling great, despite the long rest and stress of the last few days. Ruvia noticed Maria's strange behavior, which immediately caught her attention. She quickly realized something was wrong, though she couldn't quite put her finger on it. She tried to speak to the maid, but she refused to speak to her, clearly avoiding contact. This alarmed Ruvia, causing her to wonder about what was happening. Ruvia noticed that Marie seemed more confident, believing her mistress didn't need anything from such a simple girl. This made her think something was wrong with their relationship. Realizing the maid was offended, Ruvia decided to calm her down a bit and offered to try something delicious. She hoped this would help ease the tension and establish rapport. Ruvia offered to eat strawberry cake, but the maid immediately turned away, clearly not interested in such an offer, and refused, which surprised Ruvia even more. The lady thought that in that case, we could go to Mayon Restaurant, which serves delicious spaghetti with seafood and tomatoes. She even suggested we get some strawberry juice to go. Ruvia decided that if the maid didn't join in, she would eat everything herself. This prompted Marie to approach and remark that such efforts were unnecessary and that she shouldn't worry about her condition. Maria still couldn't hide her distress and admitted she couldn't do anything about it. This underscored her concern, even if she didn't show it openly. Ruvia was puzzled by how anyone could not care for their mistress. It seemed impossible to her, as caring for the person you serve was a natural part of their relationship. Ruvia explained that just as a child needs its mother, so too should a servant be close to her mistress. This care was an important part of their mutual bond. Ruvia said that if they didn't leave soon, there would be a lot of people on the street, and they might run into a crowd. Therefore, she wanted to leave as early as possible to avoid unnecessary inconvenience. Maria noticed that the lady only had 20 cents left and decided to check if she had any money. It was a question that clearly bothered her, given the current situation. The lady was shocked and asked in surprise what the girl had been eating all this time, given their limited means. This clearly left her quite shaken. Marie calmly replied that she'd been eating buns left over from the previous days. She reminded him that housing and food were provided only to students, and she should have been more careful. The lady asked the girl to show respect, but Marie immediately replied that there was no need to apologize and that she did not need excessive politeness about it. Everything was fine. She liked these buns. Then the lady asked curiously if Maria knew what she hated most in the world. It's a question she always asks. Ruvia replied that what she hates most is when people live in poverty. If someone is dear to her, she wants them to live with dignity, be well-fed, well-dressed, and have everything they need. That's why her maid Marie must live the same way. Marie tried to explain that simply being near her mistress was enough for her, that this alone was enough for her happiness. However, Ruvia disagreed and insisted that the maid follow her. Marie was a little confused, unsure of what exactly she was about to do. Ruvia said they would go earn money, and this time the goal wouldn't just be to earn money, but to collect as much as possible. It was a clear goal, and they were confidently moving toward it. All the students looked so energetic and full of energy that Mrs. Ruvia couldn't help but notice how wonderful this time was. In her eyes, it was a moment of special upliftment. She couldn't help but notice Marie staring at her, and she asked what it was about. There was a hint of interest in her voice. Marie, a little embarrassed, admitted that the lady looked amazingly beautiful in this outfit. Her words were sincere and full of admiration. Ruvia smiled, Noticing that this was indeed the case, she was pleased with her appearance and happily accepted Marie's compliment. The maid, always attentive, added that her mistress was the most beautiful and asked curiously what had prompted Ruvia to choose this particular dress. Ruvia explained that since the beginning of the school year, all students have been wearing the academy uniform, and she simply needed this dress to earn some money. Look! The maid sincerely hoped her mistress wasn't up to no good. Ruvia, laughing, replied that she was simply being silly and not worth worrying about. Suddenly, there was a loud bang, and Ruvia looked up to see what was happening. It was a moment of surprise, and everyone's attention was riveted on what was happening. One girl screamed loudly at another, accusing her of inappropriate behavior and demanding an immediate apology. Her words were full of anger and aggressions. They were students from the academy, and the one who had just been insulted took the blame and apologized, despite the obvious injustice of what was happening. The insulting girl didn't let up, declaring that her opponent's appearance immediately revealed her to be of a lower class. She looked at her with disdain, considering herself superior. Ruvia wasn't surprised by this conflict. Such situations usually occurred in such institutions, and there was nothing new in such student behavior. Ruvia hit the girl again, not giving her a chance to explain, and asked if she really called that an apology. She couldn't believe they would teach her that way in her house. Most likely this girl had no home to speak of. She continued to cry and tried again to apologize, but her words were useless. Marie asked the lady how they should act in this situation, what they should do next. The question was sincere, as the situation was quite complex. Ruvia asked why she was still standing there. Time was ticking, and they needed to leave, as they were running late. The girl reminded him of this, not hiding her impatience. Marie wondered if they couldn't help this poor girl, given her pitiful state. She sincerely hoped there was a way to intervene. The mistress asked again who they were talking about, referring to the commoner. The maid confirmed that they were talking about her, which added tension to the conversation. The lady continued that this girl's behavior was entirely consistent with her low birth. This attitude was the norm for her, which only confirmed her contempt. If this girl truly believed herself guilty, she should have gotten down on her knees and begged for forgiveness like a dog, according to the mistress. That was her view of the situation. The girl tried to say at least something in her defense, but the aristocrat shouted at her to quickly carry out her orders, without wasting time on empty talk. Ruvia noted that the maid probably understood perfectly well that such situations happened all the time, and they couldn't help everyone who found themselves in trouble. Maria was upset and noted that she understood what was happening, and the lady noted that this option could not be criticized since differences in origin are present even within the academy. The maid agreed with her mistress and confirmed that this was how Ruvia usually acted, always acting at her own discretion. This was her usual behavior. However, this little brat still didn't understand much. She was just beginning to grow up. Ruvia didn't found the academy to watch such childish antics. The lady added that it was impossible to ignore this, and she nevertheless decided to intervene, stepping forward sharply and without thinking, hitting the aristocrat in the head with her heel. The girl screamed, trying to figure out who had dared to do this. There was rage and surprise in her voice. She was completely delighted by what had happened. The lady's voice came from behind, calmly declaring that it was she who had initiated this. Ruvia made no secret of her intentions. The girl was shocked when she saw Princess Ruxina standing before her. Shocked, she couldn't believe the lady herself had decided to do such a thing. The lady noticed that this was not done on purpose, and then asked the girl again, who asked her to stand in this place under attack. In response, the girl lowered her eyes, embarrassed, and quietly said that lady should be more careful next time not to cause herself unnecessary problems. The lady smiled back and asked why the girl hadn't introduced herself earlier. It seemed odd, since she couldn't have failed to know who she was. The girl became even more frightened, her heart beating faster. She couldn't believe the princess was asking her such questions. The lady repeated in a cold tone that she had asked why the girl hadn't introduced herself properly. She seemed unaware of who stood before her. In fear, the girl immediately bowed deeply, introducing herself as the daughter of Viscount Philaine, trying to ease the tension and show respect for Ruvia. The lady sighed and wondered why the girl's knees were so low. Apparently it was important, because she couldn't understand how she could have positioned her legs like that. The girl's left knee was slightly twisted, which piqued the lady's interest. Seeing this, she asked again, why had she placed her right hand on her waist? The lady noticed that the girl seemed to deliberately tilt her head before arching her back. Perhaps this was a new method of greeting, and she decided to inquire. The aristocrat, despite her confusion, apologized. However, she said she would teach the girl, and to avoid leaving anything unsaid, suggested she try again. The princess, without hesitation, added that she needed to bow again, but that this should not be perceived as something wrong. Everything must be done according to the rules. The girl confidently replied that she had been well trained and would do everything as expected. To avoid making any mistakes, she promised to follow the advice and would thank the lady later. The lady again reminded the girl to bow her head lower and take her time, as modesty and elegance are important elements of behavior in Western culture. She needed to be more refined. Afterwards, the lady approved of her actions and said that her greeting now complied with all the rules of etiquette. She noted that the girl had learned her lesson well. The girl thanked her for her guidance. The lady in turn asked if she would like to continue her training, as she was willing to offer a few more useful tips. However, the girl without hesitation immediately bowed. She expressed gratitude for the lesson and declared that it was quite enough for her. She had urgent business to attend to, and apologizing, she stated that she had to leave, but with gratitude for the knowledge she had received. The mistress announced that it was time to leave this place. The maid was completely delighted. It was a true miracle for her. Once again, the mistress's heart had conquered her feelings. Ruvia couldn't understand what was so special about what was happening around her, or why other people were so delighted. It all seemed completely alien and incomprehensible to her. Suddenly, Ruvia heard someone thank her. The unexpected gesture caught her attention, causing her to stop and look around. Turning around, she noticed a simple girl named Ryudinka, who bowed to her gratefully. Ryudinka said she was immensely grateful because it was for her sake that her mistress had done such a deed. Ruvia approached the girl and calmly noted that her actions weren't aimed specifically at her. It was for a completely different reason. The lady explained that she wanted to teach a lesson to one of the women closest to her world, Maina. This was her personal decision, unrelated to the commoner. Therefore, in her opinion, there was no point in jumping to conclusions. She didn't even know this girl was here. She had nothing to do with this matter. Despite this, the girl was still touched by the mistress's words. She noticed that Ruvia hadn't really meant to inconvenience her. The name was Milia, and she promised herself she would never forget the gesture her mistress had made for her. It left an indelible mark on her heart. Maria couldn't help but ask again if the lady truly wanted to help this girl. Her doubts were understandable, and she decided to clarify. Ruvia had long ago explained that this wasn't true. None of this was happening out of a desire to help, or anything like that. She added that they needed to move on. It was time to leave, and they shouldn't dwell on these disturbing thoughts. All this time, a guy had been watching what was happening. He had a feeling that this girl was a very interesting and unusual freshman. But after thinking a little more, he quickly changed his mind. Perhaps she should be named his future daughter-in-law. The young man couldn't have imagined that his future daughter-in-law would be so charming. He was stunned by her appearance and demeanor, and never expected such an impression from her. He was puzzled by rumors that she was a recluse, because in reality, she was nothing like that. Where these rumors originated, he couldn't understand. The prince remarked that Ezekiel should be more careful with his choice of words. He understood that in their world, every word could be important, and he needed to be more careful. The boy asked Ezekiel not to look at him like that. It was a look that was frightening, and he didn't want his older brother to continue looking at him with such intensity. The eyes of the elder brother, the emperor, were truly terrifying. There was something about them that made one feel uneasy, as if they were seeing more than they should. Ezekiel apologized, and somewhat hesitantly asked if it was true that it was better to call them the eyes of a beholder rather than the eyes of an emperor. He wasn't sure what to call them exactly. The eyes of the contemplator. Currently, only one person on the entire continent possesses this gift, the fourth Prince of Orleans. It is a special ability that allows one to see the essence of things. The eyes of the beholder have a unique ability to discern the truth hidden behind external appearances. These eyes are considered the symbol of emperors and are often referred to as the eyes of the emperor. The owner of these eyes was destined to become the ruler, and at the moment, a fierce struggle was being waged for the right to inherit power in the Western Empire between the crown prince and the fourth prince. The prince warned them that they were not alone in this academy and that they needed to be careful. The battle for power required attention and caution to avoid unnecessary risks. Ezekiel noted that if the crown prince himself was here, then he should be the one on guard, and promised that she would take this into account in her further actions. He also added that the future of the prince's daughter-in-law looks truly exciting and difficult to imagine. These words could not help but draw attention to her extraordinary destiny. This woman is no recluse, but an incredible beauty whose looks and charisma would outshine anyone in the empire. Her likes can be found on only a few fingers of one hand. Regarding the way she interacted with the Viscount's daughter, he couldn't help but remark on her behavior. It was pure perfection. Her charm left no one indifferent. Ezekiel inquired about his opinion of the princess, asking him to share his first impressions of her character and behavior at this academy. The fourth prince replied that she was beautiful, which surprised the boy a little. After all, that clearly wasn't enough to express all his thoughts and feelings about the princess. The fourth prince simply remained silent in response to his comment. The boy realized there was no point in discussing this topic with him any further. There was clearly nothing new to be found. This reaction was quite typical of him, but the boy still couldn't help but wonder why the crown prince had returned to the academy after completing the mandatory 2 years of training. He had already completed all the required courses, and now it was completely unclear why he was here again, and in the role of a temporary teacher, which seemed strange and not entirely logical. The fourth prince noted that the crown prince's intentions were completely unclear to him. He couldn't figure out what exactly he was planning. His actions seemed mysterious, and nothing provided any clear clues. The reason they say is that the crown prince misses the academy, but the fourth prince himself doesn't believe it. He's certain no one in their right mind would take such a reason seriously. The fourth prince couldn't even begin to guess what lay behind such intentions, finding them simply absurd. In his eyes, it resembled playing with fire too dangerous to trust. Today, the prince is completely absent. His absence baffles everyone expecting his active participation, and no one can figure out what he's doing at this moment. Rumor had it that the fourth prince had heard that the crown prince was currently at the casino. This only increased his surprise and even displeasure. Ezekiel could never forgive him. The fourth prince remarked that perhaps the crown prince had come here not to continue his games, but to rest. However, he was certain that his actions should be forgotten. Ezekiel couldn't understand how such behavior could be easily forgotten, and more importantly, he was uneasy even mentioning it to his older brother. Everything that was happening baffled him. The fourth prince stated that he wasn't concerned. His opinion was clear. However, it seemed his younger brother remained concerned, which only made the situation even more tense. He also asked if Ezekiel had completed his dissertation, hinting that he must have a lot on his plate. This prompted Ezekiel to consider the importance of his studies. Ezekiel flinched slightly at the question, quickly replying that he hadn't come here to deal with such serious matters. He wanted to relax and enjoy the moment, forgetting about work. Ezekiel declared he would go first to save time, while the fourth prince remained, where he was continuing to look down, lost in thought. His thoughts were taking him far from the current situation. The maid, seeing all this, asked again if her mistress really intended to work here. Her questions were filled with anxiety and uncertainty, which only emphasized the strange atmosphere in the air. Ruvia wondered if there were truly issues worth addressing, and whether she considered them important. She was a little concerned, but she wasn't sure. Marie replied that there were certainly problems, because it was a casino, and there was always risk. The place attracted people accustomed to gambling. As they walked, shouts, laughter, and excited cries could be heard. The aristocrats didn't hold back spending large sums of money absorbed in their games. Without a second thought, yes, this entire building is connected to the casino, and it is clear that the gentlemen expect to profit from the gambling that takes place here every day. Marie insisted that she and the lady leave this place before it was too late, because such games could be dangerous for anyone. Ruvia calmly replied that there was no need to worry, because she was a good card player and could keep everything under control even if the atmosphere was tense. The maid reminded her that it wasn't how she played, but the process itself. Gambling here attracts people with addictions. It's not safe. Ruvia smiled and stated that she didn't look like a person addicted to games, and asked again if the maid was exaggerating the situations. The maid clarified that she had not meant her personally, but that the very nature of gambling is always a risk, especially for those who cannot stop. Ruvia agreed that the maid was right, but she was determined to do something a little different, and was not going to give in to this dangerous atmosphere. You could call it a game of justice. The maid didn't quite understand what this really meant to those mistresses. She could only guess at the meaning of their words, but she clearly sensed the tension of the situation. There are certainly those in this place who use dishonest methods, These people win money by deceiving others. Their cunning and sophistication are conspicuous, creating anxiety. Ruvia decides that these are the very people she wants to rob. Her goal is to punish the swindlers and deprive them of what they so easily earned through dishonest means. The fight against injustice is on her mind. Of course, she has good intentions, but extorting money from scammers is becoming almost a pastime. It's a profitable endeavor, and even moral principles don't stop her. Although Ruvia herself understands that this brings her pleasure, as it brings back memories of the old days, when she herself used to do similar things, she can't help but remember how skillfully she deceived people setting traps for them. To start, Ruvia decides to win a little money at the dice table. 20 sen isn't a huge amount, but it's enough to try her luck. It's not particularly risky, but there's still a thrill. Marie, noticing that the game is getting out of control, tries to help her mistress. She suggests betting a different amount, one she considers more reasonable, but Ruvia continues to stick to her plan. Ruvia, hearing the maid's comments, responded with a smile. She reminded her that she herself had recently said that gambling was evil, but now it seemed she no longer cared. The maid, seeing that Ruvia wasn't going to back down, began to doubt. She admitted she didn't know what was going on, but Ruvia was firm in her resolve. They had to win at any cost. Marie was absolutely thrilled when they earned their first 200 sen. She immediately began dreaming of more, imagining how they would soon become truly rich. Ruvia remained more reserved. However, Ruvia realizes that it's impossible to make money gambling. She looks at the maid, reflecting on how pointless such games are, despite all the winnings. Marie is surprised when Ruvia stands up and heads for the exit. She says they're winning and that it would be foolish to leave now, since luck is on their side. But Ruvia remains adamant. Ruvia decided it was time to play a different game. She was preparing for the next stage of their plan, which was far more important and ambitious than simply winning the dice. Everything was going according to plan. The maid, noticing Ruvia's seriousness, asks if they should continue. She suggests putting all the games aside and simply enjoying the process, but Ruvia firmly rejects her suggestion. Ruvia replies that if they're already here, there's no point in wasting time. They need to do everything they can to complete their task. She's determined to try to get more. Ruvia asks about the maid's 3,000 sen. She tries to convince her mistress that such a sum is entirely possible. Ruvia is confident that luck will be on their side. In such a huge casino full of gamblers, there are bound to be those trying to cheat the system. After all, where big money is involved, there are always scammers. A family could live for a whole year on 3,000 sen, depriving themselves of everything. This amount would allow them to forget about poverty and live quite comfortably. If she manages to earn this money, she'll be able to put her financial worries to rest for a while, and if she wins even more, she won't even get out of bed. She carefully scanned the room, trying to determine who might be a good fit. At that moment, she heard a man complain that he'd been counting on a flush, but the cards had turned out to be completely different. Everyone around him watched his game with interest, discussing how much he'd already earned. The spectators' curiosity only grew, as it's not every day you get to see someone win big. The spotlight fell on a young man with ash-blonde hair, playing with incredible confidence. His composure betrayed a man accustomed to taking risks and knowing exactly what he was doing. His face expressed both cunning and calculation. He was a born con man, and Ruvia realized he was the perfect man for her purposes. A moment later, he turned to a woman nearby, and with a slight smile, invited her to sit at the table and play together. It was to Ruvia that he approached, inviting her to participate in the game. She didn't hesitate and readily agreed. The man asked if she knew the rules of poker, since that was what they were going to play. Ruvia answered confidently. She was well acquainted with the rules of this game. Hearing this, the man's smile widened, and he said that was wonderful, meaning they could begin. He added that if anything seems unclear, don't hesitate to ask. Everyone is here to enjoy the game. Then he deftly shuffled the deck, finally inviting them to begin the game. The first few games proceeded as usual, without any unexpected developments. It seemed as if the opponents were simply testing each other, not revealing all their cards. But in the fifth game, the situation changed dramatically. When Ruvia glanced at her opponent's cards, she noticed that luck was clearly on his side this time. His hand looked too good to be a fluke. She smiled immediately, realizing that he was at work here. The game was unfolding suspiciously, and she had no doubt he was cheating again. He watched her reaction carefully and concluded that this beautiful lady wanted to tell him something. However, he was in no hurry to initiate the conversation. But Ruvia merely replied calmly that she was simply waiting for the next move, which would decide the outcome of the game. She didn't show any excitement, but deep down, she knew something was fishy. To her surprise, the trick this guy pulled off wasn't just a simple trick, but genuine magic. He wasn't just skillfully juggling cards, he was using supernatural powers. At the crucial moment, he used teleportation magic, changing the arrangement of the cards right before everyone's eyes. It was so quick and seamless that an ordinary player wouldn't have suspected a thing. In a single move, he created a top-level combination, perfectly executed and devoid of any trace of interference. Such mastery could deceive even the most experienced players. No matter how skilled a person, they couldn't win against such a sophisticated cheater. Their only chance of winning was to see through his ruse and catch him in the act. If of course the player can do it. Ruvia calmly declared that she had the combination ready. Her voice was even, but something strange flashed in her eyes. Unfortunately, his cards were stronger. He had a three-flush. Ruvia merely chuckled, saying she'd probably stop there. She apologized and hinted that it was time to wrap things up. Against her, the one who is able to sense the smallest fluctuations of mana, who literally feels their movement. Using magic in a card game with her is like laying your cards on the table, as any changes in the flow of mana will not go unnoticed. The man remarked admiringly that this was simply incredible. He'd been playing cards for years, but had never before encountered such an amazing player. The lady remarked with a slight smile that this was the first time she had encountered such a wonderful person. There was a distinct hint of sarcasm in her voice, but the man, not catching the mockery, took it as a sincere compliment, became embarrassed, and sighed heavily, hiding his embarrassment. Even in spite of the defeat, the fact that such a charming lady called him a good man lifted his spirits and gave him confidence. The girl watched him with interest, amazed that he still hadn't gotten the sarcasm. Then, with a slight smile, she suggested they play the final round for high stakes. The lady clarified his intentions, and the man, with a slight excitement in his voice, confirmed, if so, then all the money would be at stake. She merely shrugged, saying that she only had 1,000 sen, and added that, in that case, he would most likely be playing at a loss. The man calmly replied that in the worst case, he would lose 2,000, and judging by his tone, he was quite happy with that. But there was one condition. If the man won, she had to fulfill his request. This offer came unexpectedly, and the lady became wary, suspecting a trick. Gazprom was surprised and asked what they were talking about. The man calmly explained that if luck was on his side, he wanted to spend the day with her. The lady was indignant. She was outraged that he had dared to make such a demand. She decided that he was either a joker or a man lacking common sense. Rising from her seat, she coldly declared that she had no intention of agreeing to such terms. Her refusal was categorical, and she had no intention of changing her mind. The man flinched slightly, taken aback by her reaction. He didn't understand why she was rejecting his proposal so abruptly, as if it were an insult. The lady noted mockingly that he hadn't even offered 20,000, so he thought he could buy her attention for just 2,000. She was both amused and angered. In his eyes, she looked cheap, and that was what irritated her most. She was upset to realize that he didn't even try to hide his assessment. The crown prince bowed unexpectedly, apologizing for his impudence. Then he proposed another option, hoping she would finally agree. He admitted that 2,000 was indeed too little, but he had a different proposal. Just have tea with her. It seemed more innocent and less provocative. The lady nodded in agreement. This was already acceptable. She was so confident of her victory that she saw no reason to deny him such a trifle. They began the game. Each player was to draw 3 cards and then reveal them. The fate of their dispute depended on just these few moves. When the man revealed his cards, his combination was 777. He smirked smugly, glancing at Ruvia, as if he was already celebrating his victory, confident in his luck. Ruvia accepted the challenge, calmly showing no emotion. She laid out her hand, 2-2-2, on the table. Her gaze was confident, even though the cards didn't seem to favor her. The atmosphere around them grew tense. It was now clear that Ruvia, too, held a strong hand. The tension grew, and the outcome of this game no longer seemed so predictable. Soon, they each received 5 additional cards. All the man had to do was wait for a quad. If luck was on his side, that would guarantee him an absolute victory. A quad was a combination of 4 cards of the same rank. The man watched the hand closely, wondering if luck would turn his way at this late hour. Ruvia calmly watched her opponent and told him to draw cards. He knew he only needed to change 1 card to win, and now was the perfect time to do it. Suddenly, she felt a surge of magical energy. Everything became clear. He had cast a spell on his last card, just as she had suspected all along. The man raised his head and asked if their agreement still stood. His voice was confident, but his eyes betrayed a hidden excitement and anticipation of the outcome. Ruvia nodded, confirming that everything was still according to the rules. However, before discussing the consequences, they had to determine the winner of this game. They both glanced at the man's cards, 4 sevens, 4 of a kind. Everyone around him was sure he had won. It seemed obvious. But suddenly, a voice rang out. Ruvia must show her cards. She did so, and a royal flush appeared on the table. Everyone froze in amazement. No one expected this. The crown prince, watching the game closely, noticed that his mistress was clearly celebrating her victory. He acknowledged her triumph and added that the game had been tense and he had played well. But the crown prince wasn't the only one skilled in cunning. The lady was confident in her abilities and knew how to outplay her opponent, because in gambling, it's not just luck that wins, but also intelligence. The fact that both quads and a royal flush came up at the same time was an almost impossible coincidence. She'd obviously planned this round in advance, and every move had gone exactly as she'd planned. She foresaw that the prince would try to influence the cards with magic, and created a situation in which he would inevitably receive a quad, leaving himself only the strongest hand. So following her plan, fate itself gave her the highest combination of cards, leaving her opponent no chance of winning. As a result, their winnings amounted to a whole 4,000, and for now, this amount should be enough to not think about money for some time. The lady won absolutely everything, leaving her opponent without a single coin. She even felt a little sorry for the crown prince, whom she had so skillfully outplayed. Meanwhile, the prince, leaning back in his chair, admitted that the game had been exciting. He called the game an honor and enjoyed the moment despite the defeat. Intrigued, he looked at his rival and politely asked if he could find out her name, since such an intelligent and beautiful woman certainly shouldn't remain a stranger. The lady, without expressing any particular emotion, calmly replied that her name was Ruvia, without adding anything extra. The crown prince smiled, slightly turned to her, and looking thoughtfully into her eyes, remarked that her name was very beautiful. He was also somehow certain that their paths would cross again. Ruvia answered without hesitation that she doubted it. However, the prince was adamant, and with easy certainty declared she was mistaken, as their meeting was inevitable. The lady didn't argue. She simply turned, and without looking back, walked away, leaving the prince alone with his thoughts. When they returned to the restaurant, the maid was shocked. They had in their hands not 400, but a whopping 4,000. She couldn't believe they'd hit such a big jackpot. But something else worried her. If the bag of money was left open, someone would definitely steal it. She had to be careful not to lose everything in an instant. But Ruvia was adamant. She firmly declared that she would not give up a single coin to anyone. The money belonged to them, and she had no intention of parting with it. The lady graciously offered the young man a meal and wished him bon appétit. However, deep down, she knew the young man had figured out her scheme and was perfectly aware that she had cheated. The young man's last glance left no doubt. He'd guessed everything. There was no malice in his eyes, only a slight smile, as if he'd known all along how it would end, and had no intention of revealing it. But surprisingly, he said nothing. Why had he simply remained silent instead of confronting her? It remained a mystery, and it left her feeling uneasy. What was particularly alarming was the way he spoke of meeting again. He sounded confident, as if he knew for certain that their paths would cross again. The maid cautiously asked her mistress who she thought this mysterious man was. Maria remarked that he was quite attractive. The lady, instead of answering, looked away thoughtfully. She couldn't shake the feeling that this young man reminded her of someone, but she couldn't yet figure out who. However, she was far more impressed by his magical abilities than by his appearance. The way he teleported the cards without leaving a trace spoke of a mastery beyond the capabilities of a mere mage. Mere wielders of mana are incapable of such feats. This was something transcendental, a level attainable only by supreme mages, and such beings can be counted on the fingers of one hand in the Empire. There were no more than 20 of them in the entire Western Empire. She simply couldn't help but know each of them. Was this really a man standing before her, whose name should be known to every mage? The young archmage. After some thought, it finally dawned on her. This boy was the crown prince of the Western Empire, Wildheim. He possessed the most extraordinary magical talent in history. However, if it really was him, What was the crown prince doing in such a place? She couldn't find an explanation. Ruvaya decided there was no point in wasting time thinking about it. This man would never appear in her life again, and there was no point in thinking about him. She'd earned a little money. Why not indulge in a little spending now? They entered an expensive boutique filled with elegant gowns. The maid looked around in surprise, realizing that she had never been in such a luxurious place before, where every detail screamed wealth. She turned to Ruvia and enthusiastically offered to help her choose a dress. Her voice was confident. Anything would suit her mistress, because anything would look stunning on her. However, Ruvia simply replied calmly that she didn't need any new clothes. This whole thing wasn't for her at all. The purchases were intended for Maria. The girl was stunned by this statement. She looked at her mistress in confusion, trying to figure out if she had heard wrong, and carefully asked if it was really so. Meanwhile, Ruvia approached the salesperson with a request to select for Maria several casual outfits as well as a couple of formal dresses of the highest quality without the slightest expense. The maid immediately noticed that all this was too expensive for her. She found it impossible to wear such expensive clothes intended for people of a completely different status. But Ruvia calmly replied that she was doing this not for the maid's sake, but for her own. These words only further confused the girl. She had no idea what her mistress meant. Ruvia firmly stated that it irritated her when people judged her subordinates based solely on their appearance. She considered it unfair and refused to allow anyone to speak disparagingly of them. Now she found herself the only one so close to the mistress. However, she felt extremely awkward trying on all these outfits despite their luxurious appearance and impeccable tailoring. By all appearances, she genuinely enjoyed it. Such a lively reaction was worth the time and money. The pleasure was clearly worth it. It was important to her that a person could experience such moments during life, because after death, all of this loses all meaning and nothing matters anymore. While you can, you need to appreciate the moments spent with loved ones and enjoy them without putting off joy for later. The girl felt genuine gratitude toward her mistress. She promised to make even greater efforts to justify the trust placed in her aunt. There was another store ahead, and the maid couldn't hide her surprise. How much money could they spend? She was amazed by their stamina and desire to continue shopping. When Ruvaya returned to her room, she plopped down wearily on her bed, declaring that she was completely exhausted after a long day and couldn't go on any longer. All she wanted was to rest. She said she had to be away for 70 hours, and she didn't know how to cope, as the time would be filled with numerous obligations and worries. The journey turned out to be long. At that moment, someone knocked on the door, and Ruvia was puzzled, not understanding who it could be, especially at such a late time when everyone should have been resting. When the maid opened the door, she literally shuddered to see the prince standing there. It was unexpected, and the maid couldn't hide her fear, not understanding why he was there. The prince asked if Ruvia was a first-year student named Ruvia Ruxin. His voice was confident, and he clearly expected a specific answer, unaware of the emotions it would evoke in her. Ruvia, slightly taken aback, confirmed his words, replying that it was she. Then, curiously, she asked who he was and what brought him to her room on such a night. The prince introduced himself as Orleans Lon Hostia, and at that moment, Ruvia realized he was the fourth prince. She was stunned, unable to believe her ears, thinking it was some kind of mistake. Ruvia couldn't believe he was really who she'd heard about. She could hardly resist the urge to ask again if she'd understood his idea correctly. The prince, in turn, bowed to her respectfully. This was unexpected, and Ruvia, still in disbelief, bowed her head in return, also introducing herself by her full name. Ruvia couldn't understand what the prince was doing in her room. She didn't want to meet him, but despite that, he came here himself, violating her privacy. He apologized for the lateness of his visit, explaining that, as a village headman, he could not ignore his duties, and that he had an important matter to attend to that could not be delayed. The prince noted that she had handled the situation well, but reports had come in that she had been seen gambling at the casino for large sums. He couldn't ignore this fact. The prince reminded her that such behavior constitutes an offense subject to punishment. He announced that she would be expected before the disciplinary committee the following morning for an investigation. And without waiting for an answer, he abruptly slammed the door behind him and left, leaving Ruvia in complete confusion and even greater bewilderment, not knowing what to do. The maid asked anxiously what they would do now. The mistress, without losing her composure, replied that sometimes you just have to accept things because such situations happen. The maid was astonished by her mistress's indifference, This was a disciplinary committee after all, and she didn't seem to care. This behavior astonished the maid. The mistress suggested they simply go to bed. Marie, a little alarmed, reminded them that school hadn't even started yet, and the punishment could be quite severe and unpleasant. Ruvia, lost in thought, remembered that at least she'd managed to spend money on necessary things. The problem was, she didn't know who could complain about her. At the moment, her main goal was to pass probation or obtain a temporary suspension from her classes. This would give her the freedom to do nothing legally. The class monitor announced that her punishment would be to have her mop the classroom floors. This was proposed as a measure to correct her behavior. The mistress remarked that this punishment seemed too lenient to her. She believed that something more serious and appropriate was needed for such actions. The prince, hearing this, asked in surprise if she really thought such a punishment was too light. He couldn't believe she was so critical. The lady firmly stated that she truly believed this. Despite her status, she felt that her behavior required far more serious consequences than simple punishment. She emphasized that he should give her probation or suspension from school so that the punishment would fit her offense. The prince noticed that Ruvia acknowledged her guilt and was willing to accept a just punishment. This was truly commendable. He couldn't help but appreciate her honesty in this matter.